19 is on your side. You're watching WLTX Plus.
Good morning. Please be seated. The case for oral argument this morning, State versus Murdaugh. We're ready to proceed.
Please record, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Well, you just heard from the South Carolina Supreme Court this morning as justices began hearing arguments in the appeal of Alec Murdaugh's double murder conviction.
Yeah, in today's hearing, it centered on two major arguments: allegations of jury tampering and whether evidence or financial crimes should have been allowed at his initial trial.
That's right. Now, the outcome could determine whether Murdaugh's convictions stand or whether the case returns to court.
Now, after more than hours of arguments this morning, the South Carolina Supreme Court, they wrapped up its hearing on the Alec Murdaugh appeal.
News 19's Kiki Gushu and Christy Calcagno standing outside of the state Supreme Court right now. Kiki actually inside of the courtroom during this whole hearing. And so we are wanting to hear from you about how the atmosphere was.
Yeah, absolutely. Inside the courtroom, it was pretty packed. We're sitting shoulder to shoulder, and I thought it was really interesting. It was actually a younger crowd. There were a lot of pre-law students in there, kind of wanting to see how this hearing would go and really learn from it. And I would say the justices were very actively engaged. I was a little bit surprised they got to go over that time limit, that allotted time limit. The trial did, or the hearing went a little bit longer, as the justices asked really intense questions, really deep questions. And it was interesting to see how the attorneys were able to respond to those questions. A lot of them, kind of bringing up hypotheticals, which I thought was interesting.
They were also bringing up a lot of previous court cases that the South Carolina Supreme Court did cover, involving Greer, involving a lot of those too. What did you kind of see as far as sitting there and you're looking at the justices? Are they all taking notes on your end? What did you see from them?
They were all ready with their questions, is what I would say. They were leaning in, a lot of them, hands on the face, leaning in, listening, and making facial reactions. A lot of them I saw, would kind of, react, making sure that they knew that they were heard. But I did think it was interesting. We didn't hear immediately from Justice Hill over in the corner. We didn't hear a lot from him in the beginning, kind of about the financial crimes. And then he did start asking a lot of questions, especially when it came to which evidence was admissible in the trial and whether that should have been allowed.
Yeah, speaking of the evidence, what was interesting is not only did they bring up the financial crimes, but it was also interesting when we were hearing on it, they were talking about the guns and they were talking about the cell phones as well, right?
There was a lot of time spent on these cell phones, Christy. They talked a lot about whether Alec Murdaugh could have dumped Maggie Murdaugh's phone out of a moving car. They're really getting into that data, what data is admissible in court, and whether there should have been a different standard when it came to cell phone data.
Yeah, so right now we are hearing as well as when it comes to Greer being on there on the stand back in the court involving the guns and the shell casings. So that was something that we were hearing as well. On top of everything that happened with Juror Z, we're talking about egg juror as well when it went over to Becky Hill, right?
Yes, we started out with Becky Hill, and a lot about Becky Hill was about whether she actually influenced the jury. But then it came back a little bit, and the justices were really talking about whether whether those 11 jurors were enough, and whether the juror Z was impacted by Becky Hill, if her verdict was impacted by Becky Hill.
Yeah, Kiki's going to have much more about that. We are also still waiting to hear from any press conferences regarding from Walters as well. We did also see the Attorney General Alan Wilson was not taking any questions, and he did leave the South Carolina Supreme Court. We'll be getting more details from here live at the Supreme Court. I'm Christy Calcagno alongside News 19's Kiki Gushu. We'll send it back over to you guys in the studio.
All right. Thank you so much, Kiki and Christy. And one of the things that we just learned moments ago, one of our managers came in and let us know that the prosecution, Creighton Waters and his team, will not be holding a press conference. However, we have learned that Harpootlian and Murdaugh's defense team will be holding a press conference within the next 30 minutes or so. So that's definitely something that we will be on the lookout for.
Yeah, and absolutely. We know a lot today was discussed, a lot we all kind of indulged in and took took in, and it's a lot to break down. So for that, we have brought in our experts this afternoon to kind of help us with everything that was discussed inside of the state Supreme Court. And Dame Phillips, thank you so much for joining us. You've been here with us all morning and into the afternoon. So want to recap that appeal hearing that you just heard. You heard the entire thing. What are your thoughts so far?
Well, as I said a few moments ago, that kind of the attitude of leaving that based on the questions that were asked is that the court has grave concerns as to the issues raised on appeal, specifically the two primary issues of the jury tampering through Becky Hill as well as the financial crimes, the improper character evidence. But they also delved pretty deep into what they would say is improper expert opinion testimony, whether it was related to cell phone, digital forensic evidence, as well as firearm ballistics evidence. There was a pretty significant amount of time spent on those two issues that, for the most part, many people didn't believe was going to be given a ton of time for this oral argument. And so overall, I felt like the overall tone and attitude of the questions that Alex Murdaugh's legal team is feeling very positive going, or at least leaving the South Carolina Supreme Court today, that they certainly are in a good position potentially to have this case reversed on appeal.
I want to talk about Juror Z for a hot second. We spoke briefly during the hearing. The state, they kind of pushed back, calling the comments fleeting and arguing that there was no proof that the verdict was influenced. However, we know through the affidavits that the Juror Z said that they were influenced. We also know that the judge said she basically did not believe Juror Z. What reason do we have behind that?
Well, that's kind of one of the big issues raised by Murdaugh's legal team, is the fact that former Chief Justice Toll did not fully provide a basis challenging Juror Z's credibility, because former Chief Justice Toll did not find Juror Z completely uncredible or incredible. The issue was essentially that parts of that testimony were not credible. However, Becky Hill was found not credible as well. She has her own perjury issues, her misconduct in office guilty plea. Certainly credibility being the primary issue, is you have a sworn affidavit by one of the 12 jurors who says these comments were made and it affected her decision, it affected the verdict. By the very nature is you got to have all 12 unanimous verdict, all 12 jurors to be unanimous on a guilty verdict. That is the heart of the issue of how the Supreme Court is going to handle that issue with Juror Z, because Chief Justice Kittredge made clear, pinned down Attorney General Creighton Waters, that those comments, or at least comments in general by Becky Hill, were improper. Now, there's a dispute from the Attorney General side, from the respondent side, about whether the comments are, for Juror Z's point, are credible. That is the heart of that issue. How is the Supreme Court going to side on that? It remains to be seen, but that is at the heart of it.
All right, Dane, and one last question. We want to go ahead and start looking forward to what we can expect to happen next. So over the next couple of months, what will the justices be doing, and how will that opinion, that decision be given out?
So each justice has law clerks. There are staff attorneys as well that work there. They will be essentially making their own decisions, and then they will be sharing them with the other justices, kind of doing a head count. And from that standpoint, they will know whether there's a majority versus whether there'll be a dissent, and then who's providing potentially dissenting opinions. And so right now is each justice outlining exactly what their position is on each of the issues that were raised on appeal, and then comparing that with the other justices to see where they're at. And the interesting thing is, again, based on what I've watched today, I do believe there is a good likelihood that we may have a reversal. Now, that doesn't mean that it ends there. The government, the South Carolina Attorney General's office, can still file a petition to the United States Supreme Court, depending on what the issue is. But there is certainly a likelihood that we could see a reversal and remand for a new trial in this case.
Dane, we want to thank you so much for joining us. In full transparency, Dane has been here since 6:30 this morning, breaking down every moment of this hearing, really helping us to understand what's going on. So again, we appreciate you so much. We appreciate your expertise. And for really, because sometimes legal jargon can go over a lot of people's heads, but I feel like we all are so much more informed about what exactly happened and what to look forward to because of your expertise and your time. So again, we're going to cut you loose. We want to thank you again for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Now, the hearing, it focused on two major issues. First, allegations that the clerk of court improperly influenced jurors. And second, whether financial crime evidence should have been allowed during the original trial.
Right. Here's how the defense framed that first argument.
This matter we're discussing this morning, a fair trial, a jury not poisoned by outside influences. I've never seen a factual pattern like this, where the clerk of court, sets out to influence the verdict, to get a guilty verdict for financial gain.
Right. Here, if Becky Hill is not credible, it's not because she didn't see it, it's not because she doesn't remember it, it's because she's a liar. Is that right?
I would say that ultimately she said she was not completely credible, and yes, sir.
So there's only one way that Becky Hill can be not credible, and that is that she is a liar.
I think that Justice Toll did not credit parts of her testimony as she looked at everything. Now, she didn't specifically find that she is a liar, but ultimately she didn't credit that testimony. But what I think is important is that neither Justice Toll nor the state relies on Becky Hill. What we rely on is what is most important, and that is the 11. The overwhelming majority of these jurors who sat there and looked Justice Toll in the eye, who judged their demeanor, who judged their credibility, and who ultimately were clear as a bell that there was no sort of improper influence on their verdict.
Absolutely, a lot of information that they were giving there as it regards to Becky Hill, and you know she played a huge part in this appeal today. I know when we were speaking with all of the attorneys this morning, they were saying that that one thing with Becky Hill is what is going to be the biggest issue to kind of get over with this hearing, as it relates to if this appeal is accepted or not.
Right. And one of the things that I found interesting is I noticed that the justices made it very clear, because so much time was spent talking about potential jury tampering, they made it clear that this is not what typically happens when it comes to Court of Clerks. They wanted to let South Carolinians know that most Court of Clerks by far adhere to the rule of law and uphold that standard. And so I realized that that is something that they wanted to make very clear, that the situation with Becky Hill is rare. And speaking of rare, I mean, when we talked with the attorneys earlier this morning, this whole case it's rare.
Right.
They called it a unicorn, and I think that it's a great way to describe it. I mean, the situation with the jury tampering is a unicorn. The situation with how many people have been just captivated by this, that's a unicorn situation. The fact that an appeal may be granted, that's also extremely rare. And so this continues to be a case, as we continue to follow it, that stands out from so many other cases that we have seen, because we have so many instances of rare happenings.
Absolutely, and that's why when we were speaking with those attorneys this morning, I wanted to ask the question of, because of what Becky Hill did, does that kind of put a negative light on the justice system, because this case has gotten international attention, and so a lot of people now could have that idea in their head, like, if I go to court, if the clerk of the court doesn't like me or doesn't feel what I did was correct, do I have a fair trial?
Right. And one of the things that we also learned this morning, so a lot of conversation has been about Murdaugh getting a retrial because of either jury tampering, or they spent too much time talking about financial crimes. They admitted too much, which was not fair characterization of him. But also we learned this morning that every time a lawyer objects in a case, They also, during the appeal process, will look back to see if that judge made the right decision and how they decided to move forward with that objection, whether they allowed it or whether they shut it down. And so that's why you also heard so much information about things outside of the jury tampering and the financial crimes.
Absolutely. And like you said, this is far from over right now. It could take months before we get an update or a decision. Of course, we are going to be on your side, covering that through and through, giving you every update as we get them. Of course, stay with us right here on WLTX as we have so much more news to give you. All right, welcome back. We have been following the Alec Murdaugh appeal hearing all morning and to the afternoon. We've had crews inside the courtroom, outside the courtroom, and we've also had some attorneys here breaking everything down.
Exactly. Now, a lot has happened over the past 3 hours. The hearing started at 9:30, lasted to just before 12:30, so it went on longer. And that's because even though there was an outline that we had been telling you guys about throughout the week, they're Supreme Court justices. If they have questions, they are going to go over that time limit to get those questions answered, and understandably so. We were hearing from the attorneys that because this is such a high-profile case, so many eyes are on it, and they want to make sure that everything is done to a T, which they always do, but especially in this case. And so very understandable that they had a lot of questions regarding both the prosecution's and the appellate side of what happened and whether or not there should be a retrial.
Absolutely, and we had our cameras live inside of the courtroom, but we also want to know what the actual courtroom felt like,
Yes.
you know, so that's why we had our Kiki Gushu inside of the courtroom, you know, getting everything as far as like the emotional standpoint inside of the courtroom. And Kiki, kind of just take me into the courtroom. What was it like on the inside, and what were you seeing and what were you feeling in the atmosphere?
Yeah, Xavier, there was a lot of intrigue. There were faces, there were expressions in the crowd, and the justices were very engaged and with asking questions. Now, I am going to invite Joe McCulloch in with me. He is a criminal defense attorney here in South Carolina, and he also represents the family, the Cook family in the boat crash involving Paul Murdaugh, and also the egg juror.
Well, let's call her Ms. Crosby, but I think she'd like to be done with the egg lady description, but she was frequently mentioned today, as I knew she would be.
Can you tell us where that egg lady name did come from?
Well, on the final day of the case, before the jury received the case, Judge Newman called Ms. Crosby around, back then referred to only by juror number, told her that she was being excused, that she'd done nothing wrong, but he'd made the determination to excuse her, and she asked, "Can I have my eggs?" Because only that morning she had brought all the jurors a dozen eggs apiece, and her dozen eggs were in the refrigerator. So that's where the name came from.
So I think there was some confusion. I had people beside me asking, who is the egg juror? So that is, if you were wondering, that's your answer.
Well, her affidavit may have broken some eggs today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about that. So when they were talking about these claims of Becky Hill, former clerk of court in Colleton County, influencing the jury, how much of that do you think will actually become part of this, what the justices take into account?
I think that's, to me, really the issue. There is, because of our case law, very limited case law on jury tampering and the standards by which judges, trial judges, should evaluate that, and that's really a central issue here. So I think this case will be, in my view, decided on that issue, with this court clarifying how and what the standard is for jury tampering. The defense takes the position that once they produce credible evidence of tampering, that then the burden shifts to the prosecution to prove it didn't influence the jury. The judge who held the hearing on the new trial motion for jury tampering concluded that she would not grant a new trial on that basis. The defense contends she used the wrong standard. And this court seemed very interested and, if not concerned, that Ms. Crosby, the egg lady's affidavit, was considered by the court, but her testimony was not allowed. The stated reason being that she wasn't on the jury, but yet the alternate was allowed to testify. So the inconsistencies there, I think, have got the attention of this court.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch on for a second, talking about kind of that big second piece, was whether the financial crimes were admissible in court. And a lot of that centered kind of around the motion, and specifically the Satterfield brother with the mental disability being brought into the courtroom. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we have a rule called 404B that says that evidence that is collateral to the issue of, in this case, murder, and that is the financial evidence, should only be admitted if it has a reason and a purpose. Here the prosecution contended motive. This court seemed very concerned, individual members of this court seemed very concerned, and the Chief Justice referred to it as the granular nature. Why was the prosecution so insistent on going into such granular detail when you could have put this financial issue out there that he was a thief, if not a liar, in an hour? And the Satterfield situation was part of a detail that the Chief Justice, I think it was, said that was really, to me, intended to raise sympathy, not to be a probative matter, not necessary. So those are very significant issues, probably tedious and boring to the non-lawyers out there paying attention to this thing. But I think the central issue is jury tampering. The financial evidence is a significant issue to trial lawyers like me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to send it back to y'all in the studio, and we'll be bringing you more analysis throughout the day.
All right. Thank you so much, Kiki. Yeah, I remember watching the trial as it was happening, and the egg lady actually started trending. And it was a moment of levity in a very, very serious case. And so that's how she got that name, as McCullough explained there. But again, yeah, we were able to really get an inside look at to how this process happens, because there are Supreme Court hearings, appeal hearings, if you did not know. You can see those. The lawyers let us know that those are streamed live all the time. But I think this is going to be the first time that many South Carolinians, really many people across the nation, have watched a state Supreme Court hearing unfold, hearing the arguments from appellate, hearing the arguments from the prosecutors, and watching how that whole process goes. And it honestly has been a great learning experience for so many people who don't know how this process goes. Now, again, I would be remiss if I did not reiterate this, because I'm seeing a lot of folks on social media saying, he's guilty. I don't know why we're doing this. And again, the appeal hearing is not about the morality of the charges, the morality of the conviction. It's not about whether he's guilty or not. The appeal hearing is happening because his defense team says, hey, look, he didn't get a fair shot. He didn't get a fair trial. And so really all this is about is determining from the justices whether or not Alec Murdaugh received a fair trial. Now, everybody can have their opinions about whether they think he did it or did not. You'll see that like going all across social media. But the reason that it's really focused on what happened inside the courtroom is because they're trying to figure out if he received a fair trial, because as we know, our Constitution says we should all receive a fair trial.
Sixth Amendment. So, and that's something that we have been talking with our attorneys about. And you heard him on the show this morning saying he does not believe that Murdaugh received a free trial.